The case I'm going to discuss is Sciotto versus Marple Newton School District, and it occurred on January the 10th back in 1997 when Greg Findler, who was an alumnus of Marple Newton High School and also a former wrestler of the high school wrestling team, he came back and attended a Marple Newton High School wrestling practice because the head coach, Stu Nathans, had invited him. His attendance at practice was kind of keeping up with the long-standing tradition at Marple High School, in which alumni members of the wrestling team always came back to participate in the wrestling practices following their graduations. Nathans and Smith and members of the school district's board of school directors were very aware of this tradition, so evidently it went on for a while. At the beginning of the January 10th wrestling practice, Nathans introduced Findler to the wrestling team, kind of giving him his background from Marple Newton and what he had done, and he had also went on to Penn State on their wrestling team. And when he attended the high school's wrestling practice, he was 22 years old, and they say approximately that he weighed 145 to 150 pounds. Well, during the practice, he demonstrated moves, he instructed the wrestlers, and at times he engaged in what they call live wrestling with members of the team. One of the members of the team Findler was live wrestling was Sciotto, and he was a 16-year-old sophomore. At that time, he weighed 110 pounds. During the contest, Findler executed a legal wrestling move called a half Nelson, and as he was running the half Nelson, Findler heard a pop. Everybody stopped wrestling, and Sciotto said, "I can't feel my legs." They said it was reliably determined that Sciotto sustained an injury to his spinal cord that ended up rendering him a quadriplegic. His arms, his legs, and diaphragm are permanently paralyzed, and he now breathes with the assistance of a ventilator. If I was to argue both sides of this, as a high school coach myself, first off, basketball team, volleyball team, I know as a baseball coach, we have players come back. Yes, with a baseball, I realize that, and I've never allowed guys to come back and actually play. I've allowed them to work in on our drills and stuff, but I've never allowed them to pitch. But when you put yourself in a position like that, what if a young man came back and pitched at 22 years of age and hit a kid in the face, or something like that happened in baseball practice? So, as a high school coach, allowing that young man to come back at such a mature age and outweighing the Sciotto kid so much just probably wasn't real good common sense on the high school coach. Now, I realize at times high school coaches will get out there and live wrestle, and there's a lot of weight difference, but I would say there was probably a little bit of difference in the term live wrestling that at times high school coaches do versus a young 22-year-old male that's been a college wrestler comes back and wrestles a 16-year-old kid that he outweighs by about 40 pounds. So I felt that was very poor judgment on the wrestling coach's part. If anything, he should have instructed those young men when they come back to just go about half speed and be real slow and easy with those high school wrestlers. The other side of that, sometimes you want your kids to face better, stronger, tougher competition, and that's what they were doing there in allowing Findler to come back and wrestle. Would I've let him wrestle a kid that much lighter and that much younger? I'm sure the coach trusted him. I'm sure, in the deposition here it says it was a legal wrestling move, so you could say what you were doing, was legitimate, I guess. I know the basketball team at Ozark at times has basketball players come back while they're in college or just out of college, or volleyball players. I really believe a lot of schools do it. I'm not saying that makes it right, but I'm arguing both sides that sometimes coaches are, it's just a tradition where kids come back, and you want them to come back and feel like they were always part of your program. the court finding on this case, it said under Rule 56.3 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedures, if the pleadings, depositions, answers to interrogations, and admissions on file, together with the affidavits, if any, show that there is no genuine issue as to any material fact, and that the moving party is entitled to a judgment as a matter of law, then a motion for summary judgment must be granted. And that was the court finding in this case. I went on to discover that they did settle with the Marple Newton School District and their attorney out of court for $3.7 million. The AD implications for this, gosh, I just think, you always have to err on the side of judgment. You have to have the head wrestling coach has to let you know that, hey, I'm going to have some guys in today that are going to work out with us. I think the AD just kind of has to say, that's fine if the guys coming back are going to wrestle the guys coming back, or maybe just demonstrate or put on, or talk, but to let them wrestle high school kids, that was 6 years difference in 40 pounds, a really polished wrestler. I don't know. I just think as an AD, you really got to cover your tail right here and just say, we just can't allow that. I really think wrestling, baseball, those sports where injury is way more common, I just think you've got to use better judgment as an athletic director. And from my point of view and from my standpoint, I just wouldn't do it.